Hello, David here at merchantaccounts.ca with another episode of the podcast. Today we're talking about PCI compliance version 4 and what you need to know. Returning is Robert Spivak, who was kind enough to come on a previous episode of the podcast. And in that last episode, Robert unknowingly dropped a bit of a bomb on me. He told me that PCI version 4 is coming, and I didn't even know. So if I didn't know, it probably means that a lot of merchants don't know. And I wanted to get ahead of the curve as much as possible and find out what's coming along and what business owners need to be prepared for. So Robert, thanks for joining again today.
My pleasure.
Perfect. So let's just jump right in. So I'm going to start by explaining that the earliest versions of PCI didn't make a lot of sense, especially for small merchants. There were things, and I remember this as an example, and I'm not like a network systems administrator, but there was a question, do you have a DMZ? And if you ticked no, you just failed. But to my understanding, that's something you'd only have if you have like a bunch of servers. You don't need a DMZ if you only have one server. Point is, this is not an important point, but the point that I was making is earlier versions of PCI were pretty broken to the point of being, I think, kind of uncompletable by small merchants. And since that, it has gotten better. I know we've had 3 revisions that are live and the 4th one's coming. So I guess my question is, for e-commerce merchants in particular, what changes are coming in version 4? And I'm hoping in some way it's going to continue to improve, but I'm going to let you answer that question.
Absolutely. Thank you, David. And you've made some good points. Like everything, the standard evolves as things happen, as the world evolves. If you think back to the original versions of PCI, we had nowhere near the types of technology in the world, the types of e-commerce technology that is being used today. So keep in mind that every standard as it evolves will catch up with the ever-evolving technology that exists out there. The challenge is that the world just moves at a much faster pace than any regulatory body can. But we do the best we can for sure. Now, from a 3.2.1 to 4.0, as you mentioned, as of March 2024, you have to, or beyond March 2024, you need to start completing an SAQ version 4. And they do still have SAQ A and AEP for e-commerce merchants. So there are many changes that are coming your way, and some are more impactful than others. I want to talk about 3 specific ones that I think are going to feel like they're monumental tasks, but with the right partners, with the right type of QSA that can help guide you, I think they're manageable and they're certainly achievable. It's just a matter of being prepared and giving yourself the lead time to figure out how you're going to do and comply with these particular requirements. So the first one has to do with requirement 643. And as you know, with every website, whether you're using an iframe, whether you're using any type of mechanism to build the site, there's usually additional scripts that get added in the background, whether that is tracking scripts for Google AdWords or advertising campaigns, marketing campaigns, Google Tag Manager. Are you familiar with any of those, David?
Yeah, like Google Analytics to see the traffic that your website's getting and watch your checkout funnels and all that type of stuff.
Absolutely. So one attack vector that has recently been more prevalent is the fact that hackers have gotten wind of the fact that everyone uses Google Ad Managers and Analytics and various other tools to be able to do that. So they're attacking those scripts. They're man-in-the-middling those scripts, or they're modifying them in such a way that they're malicious and they're actually scraping information, whether that's privacy or PCI data, whether it's an iframe or not. Those things are happening. So one of the things that 643, requirement 643, actually talks about is the fact that you have to ensure as the merchant that all those scripts are being sourced from a secure place, and that as they're being built and actually downloaded to the consumer browser, that they cannot be modified. Now, that can be a daunting task. How am I going to do that? How am I going to ensure that what gets downloaded to an iPhone versus a Mac versus a PC, how am I going to handle that? There are several ways you can do that. There's third-party tools that you can use that would give you the ability to handle that. There are ways to define context security policies that restrict where those scripts can be sourced from, and location requirements or restrictions as to what site that they can be loaded from. So those are some techniques or tactics you could use to be able to meet this requirement. Again, it needs to be validated, and you have to be able to make sure that you're doing it correctly. And that may mean you need to do some additional testing. You may need some expertise from either a web organization or a QSA company that could do that validation for you.
Now, I have an interesting question on that, if I could cut in, Robert, because maybe you're about to get to the key. I'm sorry for doing that. But so other guests that have come on the podcast have talked about the rise of no-code or low-code solutions. I'll give you an example, a perfect example. I have a rentals website for vacation properties, and I was going to build a calendar functionality, program it, and apparently I forgot that it's been over 20 years since I was a programmer, because I started that and I was like, no, this is not happening. So I spent like 3 minutes and downloaded a software platform called OwnerRes. I'll give them a plug. I really like it. And one of the functions they provide is a calendar. So they give you a calendar widget. You drop that widget into your website. And a lot of websites are using lots of widgets. So it could be like a calendar and forms, like contact forms on a website. And oh my gosh, on an e-commerce website, there could be some sort of shipping logic widget from FedEx. Would this mean that when you're pulling in remotely hosted, I guess, scripts that are going to be going into your website, you now have like PCI steps to address? I'm curious to know if I'm understanding correctly.
You're on the right track in that if those are being drawn in with the collection of cardholder data, you have to be able to inventory on the page every script, every function, every widget, have a description of what its function is and what's the justification for it being on that page. So if you have a fully redirected page that goes to a third party, a lot of that goes to them to be able to do that, but you need to ensure that you understand what it is. But to your point, if you're building your own page and you're drawing that widget that has a payment function, a widget for shipping, a widget for that, you have to be able to document that and keep track of that. It could be a spreadsheet, it could be something along those lines, but it's a matter of ensuring that you have knowledge of what functions, what scripts, what widgets are running within your page that you're presenting to the consumer when you're asking them to pay for something.
Well, isn't that, it's so interesting. And the old developer in me from a long time ago is saying this is going to force, this is like, PCI scans are another example of something that forces good habits. Hey, you should probably be patching your Apache a little more often. In this case, you could have a Frankenstein of 10 million scripts on your website. On our website, guilty of this. So we had a smooth scroll function. So if you're on the FAQ, which is long, and you click on it, I wanted it to smoothly scroll down, like quickly but smoothly scroll down the page. And then at one point we stopped using that, but it's easy for that little JavaScript to live on, sucking up a couple K on your website, which slows it down and all that stuff. So this is actually, I would see as a benefit, because this is good housekeeping from development standards.
You're absolutely right. And that is the key. It's about keeping clean code. It's about keeping it optimized. It's about ensuring that you don't have dead code. As again, and I'm a developer by history as well. So, keeping chunks of dead code in the event that you might use it, having commented code or code that's been commented out but still lives in that particular page. Those are all common coding hygiene things that should be done, and they get forgotten over time because we get busy, we are building sites very quickly, or in a larger organization they may have a team of people that are working on that. So having the right tools to be able to ensure that you understand that what is running on that page and is it necessary. So it goes back to, if you want to think of nothing better than principle least privilege, what are the functions that absolutely need to be on my page, and are they secure? And the main reason why is because that is an attack vector now. Again, hackers become creative, they become smarter, and they evolve their attack vectors. And this is now a new type of attack that we're seeing more and more of. So the standard is evolving to address the fact that dead code can be leveraged against you.
Perfect. So what about on the scanning front? Is there anything changing there? Like, is the scan getting updated or new rules there?
So that's a great point, David. And it segues to my next main point that merchants need to be aware of when they're doing e-commerce. Requirement 11.3.2 and 11.3.2.1, which were not required in DSS version 3.2.1, are now a requirement in version 4. That requires you to actually handle ASV scanning. So that means you have to do vulnerability scanning on your site, even if you're redirecting to somewhere else, but your website needs to be scan with a vulnerability scanner, and that could be any ones that are out there. You also have to submit your ASV, and you have to have your ASV scan completed. So there's two different levels in that. An ASV scan is used with a approved scanning vendor, while just standard vulnerability scanning can be done by anyone. So a lot of QSA companies, or there are companies out there that are approved scanning vendors, and you have to leverage them to be able to run the scans, to actually certify that your site is meeting all the PCI requirements, and that gets submitted and recorded, so that way you can submit those scans and your attestation of compliance to the card brands or to your acquirer if that's the case. So keeping in mind, ASV scans and vulnerability scans have to be done every 3 months. One of the key caveats is that if your PCI anniversary date traverses March of 2024, as of March 2024, you have to adhere to 4.0 requirements. So let's say right now you're not doing your scanning. If your next scan goes beyond March 2024, you have to be ready to be able to do that. So keep that in mind, especially when you're looking at your anniversary date, when you have to comply or when you have to submit your attestations. You're going to need to ensure that you have your ASV scanning already tuned up and your vulnerability scanning process running already. Now, many organizations are doing that early.
It's interesting to me because what this tells me, and I didn't know that, is that it's going to push more businesses away from hosting themselves, because a lot of small businesses that use redirect, they could use a shared hosting. I don't get overly technical, but if a scan finds a problem on a server, hey, you're running PHP 7, you need to be running PHP 8. I'm just making an example. It's not an accurate example. Point is, if you need to do something, if you're on a shared server and you contact your web host, they might say, we can't just upgrade PHP because all the other merchants on that shared box are using PHP. So I'm wondering if there will be an effect where this chases merchants away from host it yourself, or even like a WooCommerce running on a shared WordPress hosting platform where they can't host it themselves anymore. I'm curious to know what you think about that.
Well, the good news is that most service providers, if they are hosting websites, have had to be doing ASV scanning and vulnerability scanning anyway for years. In 321, that was a requirement. If you were a service provider, you couldn't get away from that. So to your point, merchants may choose that they want to have someone just take that headache away from them and manage the website, manage all the different components of it, and do that. So you're, again, taking your requirements and you're putting it on your service provider, which is going to be important for requirement 12.8, where you have to define your responsibility matrix and ensure that your provider is actually fulfilling these requirements in 4.0. What I expect to see over the course of the next 6 to 12 months is that there's going to be a bit of a disconnect between service providers that haven't completed their 4.0 and merchants that want to complete their 4.0. And there may be some discussions back and forth, and I say that politely as discussions because we know what those will be. But ultimately, there's going to be some discussions around, hey, why aren't you doing this for me? Or I want you to do this for me. And in some cases, those service providers are going to have to change the way that they operate to be able to comply with what their merchants require.
Now you're making me think of what I think is an interesting question. There's a shopping cart platform that you may not be familiar with, or you might. It's called Foxy Cart. Are you familiar with it?
Not myself personally, no.
That's okay. But so Foxy Carts, it's not like a Shopify. It doesn't have 10 million users, but I love it because it's ultra flexible. So it's a shopping cart platform intended for developers or people that have some programming skill. This is about to make sense in a second. So if you were going to do a website selling comic books, I'm just making that up. So there's a lot of SKUs and a lot of stuff, and you're a developer, right? And a marketer, and you have a real vision about how you want it to look. You have an idea on the checkout flow. Maybe there's a subscription basis for new issues coming out. Like there's a lot of functionality. And you're like, but look, I don't want to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of custom stuff that I need, but I don't want to write add to cart logic. I don't want to integrate with FedEx. I don't want to program my own shipping logic. I wish I could drop those parts into my page. This is kind of coming back to the headless e-commerce thing. So if you have a Foxy Cart store, you could have an almost static HTML website. And then you're just going to drop a block of code in where you want your items to appear. And Foxy Cart populates that into your page. And when they click checkout, it comes up on an overlay, just a modal window or whatever you call it, an overlay. And all of the data, all of your your checkout, all of your products. Like it's impossible for your website to have this information. The checkout flow is handled by Foxy. The emails are handled by Foxy. It's all handled by Foxy in that window. In that case, what does a merchant scan? Do they scan, like, do they fall under, first of all, Foxy would be PCI level 1, they're a service provider. But would they still scan comicbooks.com? I'm curious about the answer to that, if you happen to know it.
It is a good question. Based on the way that the DSS is written today, you would still be required to scan your site because of the fact that, and this will go into the third major requirement that we'll talk about in a moment, is that even though you're using FoxyCart to do all the components that you're looking for, you are placing that code on your website. If I'm a malicious hacker or a malicious admin and I have the ability to modify that code to create that exact copy of a modal that looks like FoxyCart, I can look and feel and do everything that FoxyCart does, and I can man in the middle of that code so they can look like it's going straight through to FoxyCart, and no one's the wiser. So one of the key things that leads me to is a requirement 11.6.1, which is you need to now have tamper and change detection on your critical files in your website. As we know, there's some static components of your website that should never change, that you should never have any concerns about. Those are the ones that you need to monitor. So that could be some of your core web code. It could be some core functions that you have within your web server. Because if I can modify those links that point that code to FoxyCart or to a redirect server or to an inline frame, if I can modify that or corrupt it in some way, I have the ability to affect how card alert data is being collected, potentially skim it from your website, and you wouldn't know. So this is something that in the SAQ AEP and other standards or SAQD, this is already a requirement, but it wasn't in SAQA specifically for e-commerce merchants that would do a redirect or an iframe. Now you are required to have this, and again, it could be your third party that does this for you, but you need to be conscious of the fact that your code can be modified without your knowledge. If someone is able to hack your account and get on your Wix site or your Foxy site or WooPay or whatever site you're using to host your website on, if they can hack that, they can modify your code and you wouldn't know until it's too late. The idea now is that you need that change detection component to be able to alert you that someone's making changes to your code, and then you know whether it's, of course, yourself making those changes or is it someone who's unauthorized and now you need to go investigate.
Is that some sort of script that models or monitors the file size of files sitting on your server? Like, and I'm gonna frame this question. Netflix and Sony can solve this problem. You know, John, who has a small business and he sells, $4,000 a month of like hobby stuff. How can he comply with this in a reasonably easy way? Is it possible?
It is very possible. There are tools out there and services that will do that. And normally a change detection tool will take a hash of every file that you tell it to monitor. So it will actually take a copy of what the original file that's approved, create a hash value, and it'll compare it on a regular basis. Now that could be live, it could be daily, weekly, so you can pick the frequency, which is good. You could do a manual process, but it's very difficult because as your website grows and you may have multiple pages, you may not be able to maintain that level of frequency. But there are a lot of tools out there. Again, Tripwire is one, Carbon Black's another, Waza has capabilities like that as well. So there are tools out there, and you just have to look for a change detection tool. Again, I'm not endorsing any of those products. I have seen them used in many organizations, so I'm just mentioning them out of familiarity. But definitely you can have that. A lot of other organizations are implementing things like what's called VMDR or MDR, which is managed detection and response. So in that particular case, it's an agent that runs on your machine or your web server, and it'll do that detection for you, and it'll either prevent the change from happening or it'll at least alert you. And they can come at a reasonable cost that you would have.
So that first one, the first example, are they basically downloading your website and just like making it like I said, a hash of the file, and they're just monitoring for changes. What I want to know in that case is, because I'm thinking like my customer's like, I don't want to deal with this. That'll be the response of every single merchant.
Of course.
So can they like sign up for a service that costs some small amount of money, and they would just get an email alert, hey, we noticed that this page changed on this date and this time, and then would that qualify as what they're looking
Absolutely. That again, at that point, then you have a service provider who's doing that service for you. So again, you've taken that requirement, you've given it to a service provider that's going to do that. I expect that many hosting providers will have that as part of their service built in, so that they can say, yes, we do the scanning for you, we do the change detection for you, because it's just part of the service and it's something they have to do anyway. So they'll be able to extend that into their individual merchants, of course, for a nominal fee.
Interesting. And in that case, just one more, just because you're such a font of knowledge, I love picking your brain. My homepage has, no, not my homepage, different homepage. Thinking of a page that just has a date on it for some reason, and the date updates every day. Is that going to break that logic? Because every day when the date changes, or actually you'd be able to work around that, because as long as the change was detected when the new day happened, then it would make sense, I suppose.
Well, and again, keep in mind, typically changing the date in a web page is a function. So that's not necessarily going to be a static value that's changing in that particular page. It'll be something that goes and collects the normal date or current date from the system or from a UTC source or something like that. If you had a static value that you manually change in that file on a daily basis, yes, you're going to get an alert saying, hey, this is now changed. Are you okay with that? Normally, you want to be doing files that don't change on a regular basis, or specific files that you know should not change. So for example, dynamically created pages can sometimes be a challenge because they're going to be constantly updated with either new graphics, new pictures, things of that nature. But there are portions of a page, or there are certain functions that you can set change detection on that would actually be static. For example, I can monitor the source link to the payment page that I redirect to, and that can be a specific function. The widgets that I actually use and I've downloaded, that code shouldn't change, so therefore I'm going to ensure that I'm monitoring that particular piece of code. So again, it's somebody that has familiarity with web design, that has the ability to create the specific functions, widgets, and pages that you're looking for, and the critical components that you know should not change versus the ones that dynamically have to change because you have to evolve with the changing times.
Interesting. This is fascinating. And I will bet, I'm going to throw a bet out there right now, this is going to catch a lot of merchants off guard. I hope that a lot of people watch this, because I just know from my own customer base, merchants aren't watching PCI. So if the processor, even when the processor alerts them, they're going to they're going to look at it, it'll be, and then I'll look at that later. So this is something, I think there's some service providers, that could be a good business to be in. You could have you do have a very good business to be in, because I think a lot of people will need help with this. So is anything changing in regards to the questionnaire itself? Is it getting more questions? Is it getting more streamlined? Just curious if you have any feedback there.
So definitely the questionnaires are a little bit longer because there are new requirements in each one. Each of the SAQs have evolved to have a new numbering system. So where we had the old numbering system, some things have changed. The biggest change is the SAQD for service providers. That is the largest change that you're going to have. And again, it may not be for most of your merchant base, but it will be for many of the service providers that affect your merchants. The main thing there is that they now have to explain how they validate each of their requirements that are applicable to them. And that's a much more daunting task, because it's almost like doing a report on compliance without having to do one. So that's going to be the biggest change for most service providers. For most of the other SAQs, there will be some additional things that you need to fill out. There'll be more questions to answer. Of course, as we mentioned with SAQ A, there's 11 new requirements that you need to adhere to. Some of them you don't have to deal with until March of 2025. Some you'll have to deal with by March of 2024. The best thing I could advise is engage a QSA company that's knowledgeable, that can guide you through this process. One of the things that we offer many of our customers is an impact assessment. So we'll take a look at what your current scope is. We'll map it to 4.0 so that you have a clear understanding of what that transition looks like, so that you can then start preparing whatever processes, changes, or tools that you may need to implement to meet the requirements associated with PCI DSS 4.0.
I could see that being useful to a lot of people, definitely. So, I will say, just in this, how long have we been going here? We've been going for 25 minutes. I have learned more in this podcast than I have talking to any guest in any other podcast, which tells me how much merchants are going to be learning as well. Is there anything else you want to mention that should be applicable or e-commerce merchants should know about in terms of changes coming?
Just keep in mind that the e-commerce world is cutting edge. There's constant evolution, especially with tracking between social media platforms. If you're selling on social media, if you're using different functions, as you know, Twitter, or X as it's called now, is certainly impacting a lot of online services. Facebook, WhatsApp, all the meta functions that are happening, Instagram sales. So as you keep evolving your e-commerce world and the way you want to sell to your end consumer, you just need to be mindful of how are you ensuring that they're keeping not only their PCI data safe, but their privacy data. Because privacy is really the next big thing that's coming for everyone. So beyond PCI, you can expect privacy is the next big thing. I did want to mention that the Portland PCI community meeting for North America is on September 11th to the 12th to the 14th. So if anybody's in the area, you're welcome to come to the show. You can register online at the PCI Council PCI Council website. We'll definitely be there. Control Gap will be there, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of like-minded people that you can pick their brains and have a lot of good discussions around how the next evolution of PCI is going to affect you.
That's a really good tip. And I do have one more question, Rob. You mentioned a few times service providers and merchants. What's the, and let me give you an example though. A web host is definitely a merchant. And they're selling web hosting to other businesses. Is that a merchant or a service provider? Because they provide a web hosting service.
It's a very good question. So a merchant is typically someone who has a merchant account with an acquirer or bank. Now, a service provider provides a service to merchants, so that could be a web hosting provider. So in that particular case, they may be both a merchant and a service provider. So it's best to talk to your acquirer or your bank to find out what is it that you need to do or what SAQ you need to fill out, or talk to a QSA company that can help navigate that for you. But the biggest differentiator is a service provider provides services to merchants. So a web hosting provider, a code review service, a shopping cart provider, a supply chain provider. Those are all types of service providers that can be out there. Your telco, whether in Canada you've got Rogers, Bell, in the US you have Verizon, Sprint, AT&T. Again, not plugging anybody, but those are all service providers that you would have in your ecosystem when it comes to payments.
Interesting. Now, you have given a lot of good advice on this discussion. Where can people get a hold of you?
So again, www.controlgap.com is the easiest way to get a hold of us. There's a contact form on there. We usually respond very quickly. And again, you can always reach us at PCI@controlgap.com.
Perfect. Rob, thank you for joining so much. This was just chock full of good information. I really appreciate it.
Happy to help and support the community. And again, looking forward to anybody who can make it to the PCI community meeting this September.
Thanks, Rob.